My husband cheated on me with my best friend. I invited them both over for dinner, gathered all my family and friends, and then stood up from the table and told them the truth, looking them in the eyes. They didn't expect me to reveal everything like that, and in front of everyone. I destroyed their marriage. Stay with us until the very end to find out how the story ends. We look forward to your comments and thoughts on the story. I lived with Tom for almost 22 years. We weren't a perfect couple like in the movies. He didn't bring me coffee in bed, and I didn't greet him with a smile when he came home from work. But we were real. We laughed. We argued. We made up. We survived a mortgage, an accident, a job loss, and even a midlife crisis, which he tried to hide by buying a motorcycle at 45. I laughed when he got sunburned for the first time, thinking that you tan differently as you get older.
We had a grown daughter, our own porch, a paraclon in the attic where I kept old photographs, and a dog that hardly ever barked anymore. Life was going smoothly, and then I started waking up at night feeling like I was alone in the house. Physically, no. Tom was there. But emotionally, it was as if everything that connected us had dissolved somewhere between holidays and trips to the store. He started coming home later, sometimes without explanation, sometimes with explanations, but they were too detailed, too smooth. The meeting ran late. John's car wouldn't start. I had to give him a lift. Laura's friend asked me to help with a report, and I nodded, because trust isn't something you test every week. Either you have it or you don't. I had a friend, Jenna. We had been friends since childhood. She was the girl I built a house out of blankets with and shared a lunch with. As an adult, she became my neighbor. Then Laura's godmother. Then somehow, she became part of all our holidays, weekends, and evenings. Sometimes it seemed to me that Jenna knew Tom even better than I did. They often joked around with each other. They exchanged glances. I told myself, silly, we're just old friends. It's silly to be suspicious. It's silly to be jealous. It's silly to be afraid. And yet, something sticky began to grow inside me. Something unbearable. I started to notice how often she would jokingly take his hand, how he would laugh when she was around but not me, how there was something in her voice, as if she knew a secret that I didn't. I didn't want to believe it. I fought with myself. I told myself, you're just imagining things. But then one day, everything changed. One day, I found something that couldn't be explained away as a coincidence. It wasn't intentional. I wasn't looking for it. Honestly, I wasn't. I just wanted to print out a shopping list for our family dinner. We were planning to invite our relatives to celebrate our daughter Laura's birthday. Tom went to take a shower and left his laptop in the kitchen. I turned it on, opened the browser, and saw that he had forgotten to log out of his email. No, I didn't hack into it. I wasn't looking. It was just... The tab was open, and the first email in the list was from Jenna. Subject: just for you. Maybe I shouldn't have clicked on it. Maybe I could have convinced myself it was just a coincidence. That just for you was maybe a recipe, or a joke, or an old card forwarded from last year. But I clicked, and I saw something that made the blood drain from my veins. Only with you do I feel alive. She's like furniture, familiar but without spark. And you are my light. I'm waiting for you to say again that you want to stay the night, like last Thursday. I reread it, again and again. My brain refused to understand. Last Thursday, the very evening when he said he was spending the night at John's, his friend's place. And in the morning he came home with a tired face and smelling of a cologne I didn't recognize. I closed the letter. Then I opened the next one. There were dozens of them. Jokes, hints, memories, and photos. Their hands, their dinners, their... everything. I didn't cry. I just felt the ground disappear beneath my feet, as if I were standing over an abyss that I had dug myself, with my trust, my blindness, my naivety. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, that it was some kind of stupid joke, but it was all too detailed, too real.
Jenna, my friend. The woman who held my hand when I gave birth to Laura. The woman I told about how distant Tom had been lately. The woman who looked me in the eyes at the dinner table and poured me wine. And him? He kissed me in the morning and went to her in the evening. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I couldn't, I didn't want to. I just sat there in silence, staring into the darkness, listening to him breathe in his sleep. And then by morning, I realized, I don't want to scream. I don't want a scene. I don't want to humiliate myself, fight, prove anything. They've already done that for me. I'll just tell the truth, where it will be heard loudest. I started the morning with coffee, as usual. Everything looked familiar. The mug, the table, the light steam rising from the cup. But inside, I was different. No longer the person who closed her eyes. No longer the person who endured. I didn't want a scandal or hysterics. I wanted the truth to be heard where there had only been lies and smiles before. You know, I said to Tom over breakfast, I don't think we've all been together for a long time. How about we have dinner next week? He looked up from his phone and shrugged. Good idea. Maybe Saturday. Yes, I invited Jenna, Laura and her fiancé, my sister and my mom. I think it'll be cozy. He nodded. He had no idea. His face remained neutral, calm, as if nothing had happened, as if there hadn't been hundreds of letters. No lies, no betrayal, no strangers' hands. I looked at him and thought, how easy his life is, knowing that no one knows. That same day, I bought a new tablecloth, some beautiful candles, and vintage glasses. I got them at a store where Jenna and I used to hang out, back when we were still friends, or when I still believed we were. I called Laura and told her I really wanted to see her with James. She was delighted. My daughter had always been a bright spot in my life, and I didn't want her to suffer, but I knew that if I didn't tell her the truth now, it would fester inside me. And one day it would turn me into a woman who lived with emptiness. I didn't want to be like that. That evening I sat down with a list of dishes. I wrote down recipes. I thought about who would sit where, who would laugh, who would raise their glasses, and where exactly I would stand when I said I couldn't keep quiet any longer. It was almost like preparing for a performance, but everything in me knew that this would be real life, not a stage, not a rehearsal, reality. I didn't know how everyone would react. I didn't know if there would be silence or an explosion, but I knew that I would speak, and it would be liberating. There was 1 week left, 7 days until that very dinner, until the moment when I would get up from the table and change everything forever. 7 days. How much can fit into 1 week? If you know that by the end of it, you will open the door to a completely different life? Monday was spent making lists. I took out my notebook and rewrote everything. Dishes, drinks, seating arrangements, music. Not because I was afraid of forgetting, but to keep my hands busy. My heart was already occupied with pain, my mind with determination. Only my fingers were left, craving movement. Anything. On Tuesday, I looked through old photos of Tom and me, with Jenna, with Laura when she was in first grade. And in every picture I looked for signs, clues, looks I hadn't noticed before. It seemed like I had seen it all before, but I didn't want to look. I didn't want to believe it. Wednesday brought a strange calm. I woke up and suddenly felt that I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew that the truth could destroy a lot. But even more than that, it could set me free. I had lived in a house where the walls were saturated with betrayal for so long, and now I wanted to breathe different air, clean air. On Thursday, I ran into Jenna at the grocery store. She came up to me as usual, with a smile, a hug, and the usual, "You look wonderful," and I smiled back. Because I wasn't playing anymore, I was watching. I saw her for who she was, the woman who had betrayed my trust, taken my husband, and continued to pretend that nothing had happened. "See you Saturday, right?" she said, adjusting her scarf. "Saturday," I replied, looking into her eyes a little longer than I should have. Friday was like the day before a storm. Everything was ready, the fridge was stocked, the table was set. The dress I hadn't worn in years was ironed. I checked the list, and then again. I sat by the window, and just listened to the silence. And then, Saturday came. D-Day. The day when the truth locked in the box of my heart would finally be heard. I got up early. The morning was clear. Even the weather seemed to understand. Change was coming. I set the table. I took out the wine. Candles. Plates that I usually kept for special occasions. And at that moment, I realized that I had been keeping them just as I had kept my pain. For too long. For no reason. When the clock struck 5, the doorbell rang. Guests began to arrive. I smiled. I hugged them. I poured glasses. But inside, everything had already been decided. The room smelled of roasted rosemary, vanilla and wine. Glasses clinked, music played, light jazz just like Tom liked. Conversation and laughter filled the room. I moved between the kitchen and the living room as if everything was the same as always, just like dozens of evenings before. But in reality, everything was different. I looked at them as if I were watching a play. Jenna laughed and flashed playful glances at Tom. Tom poured her wine without even looking in my direction. My sister talked about the weather. Laura discussed her vacation with her fiancé. Everything seemed so ordinary, so cozy, if you didn't know what I knew. I caught myself thinking that each of them probably considered this evening to be just another ordinary evening. But I knew it would be the last one. The last one in which I would play a role. The last one in which I would remain silent. "Mom, everything is delicious," Laura said, raising her fork. "Just like when we were kids." "Thank you, sweetie," I replied. My voice didn't waver, but inside my whole world was shaking. I watched Jenna, how neatly she bit off her bread, how she fixed her hair, how she laughed in a whisper, leaning slightly toward Tom, and I thought, how many years I had called her my friend. How many times I had confided in her, my worries, my joys, my recipes, my secrets. And it turned out that she wasn't there to support me. She was there to take away what didn't belong to her. I watched Tom, his familiar gestures, intonations, the way he held his glass. I knew him by heart. I would never have thought him capable of betrayal. But he didn't just betray me. He pretended that everything was fine, that he loved me, that he cared. I thought, maybe I shouldn't say anything? Maybe I should just leave everything as it is. Let them live with this lie. Let them drown in their own falsehood. But then I looked at my daughter, and I realized that silence was also a betrayal of who I was, of who I had become. And then I stood up. "Friends," I said, and everyone turned to me. "I want to say a few words. Just please hear me out." Tom put down his fork. Jenna froze. Laura tilted her head slightly. The room grew a little quieter. The music was still playing, but the words I was about to say were louder than any melody. I stood at the end of the table, feeling dozens of eyes on me. The wine in the glasses froze, as did the smiles on everyone's faces. Even the candle flames seemed to freeze, sensing a storm coming. "Thank you for coming," I began calmly. I prepared this dinner with a special feeling, because I knew it would be a turning point for me. Tom frowned slightly. Jenna straightened up, but didn't suspect anything yet. The others just waited. There are moments in our lives when we have to make a choice, to endure or to speak. I endured for a long time, but today I chose the latter. I paused. I took a breath. My whole body was tense, like a string, but my voice sounded confident. Sitting at this table is a woman I considered a friend, Jenna. We've known each other for over 20 years. We shared everything with each other, almost everything. Sitting at this table is my husband, Tom, the man I have lived with, as I believed, an honest life, and I would have been the last person to suspect that they were together. A dead silence hung in the room. Someone dropped a fork. Yes, I continued, looking at Tom. I found letters, I found receipts, reservations, photographs. You were careful, but not careful enough. You, Jenna, came into my house, ate at this table, hugged me, and betrayed me. Jenna blushed, her face turning white, then flushing again. Tom froze with his hand outstretched, as if he wanted to stand up but didn't know how. I'm not saying this out of revenge. I'm saying this because I'm tired of keeping quiet. Because there are people in this room who have a right to know. Laura, I turned to my daughter, you need to understand that silence isn't always kindness. Sometimes the truth is the only way to protect yourself. Laura sat in shock. The others were silent. Only someone sighed quietly. This dinner isn't about destruction, I concluded. It's about liberation. I'm not going to pretend everything is fine anymore. I'm not going to close my eyes for the sake of someone else's convenience. Today, I am freeing myself from lies, and this is my gift to myself. I sat back down without waiting for applause or responses. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I just wanted my voice back, and I did it. The silence that followed my words was heavier than any scream. No one knew how to react. Even the spoons and forks seemed afraid to touch the porcelain. For the first time, I saw people's real faces, unadorned, unforced. Laura stared at her plate, her lips trembling. My sister nervously twirled a ring on her finger. One of Tom's friends cleared his throat and muttered something like, "I'm going to have a smoke," but never got up. Tom rose slowly. There was no remorse or fear on his face, only tense exhaustion. He looked as if he had been brought on stage without a script. "Listen," he began. "I didn't think you—" "No, don't," I interrupted him. "You've said enough. With your actions. With your choices. No excuses. They won't change anything." He opened his mouth as if to say something, but then sank back into his chair. Not to me, to himself. And that silence said more than any words could have. Jenna clenched the napkin. Her face was crimson, her eyes darting around like someone caught in the act. She tried to smile, her usual smile, warm and fake. But in this room, it no longer worked. I didn't want it to turn out this way," she said, barely audible. "It was difficult." "Difficult?" I repeated. "Difficult is staying faithful. Betrayal is a choice, a conscious choice, and you both made that choice." The guests looked at each other. Some whispered, some stared at the table. Only Laura looked up at me. There was pain in her eyes, but not from betrayal. It was from realization, from the collision with a reality that she too had not noticed, or did not want to notice. I stood up again and picked up my glass. "Thank you all for coming," I said calmly. "Dinner is over. I no longer owe anyone anything." I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I just turned around and went into another room, leaving them in the living room where, for the first time in a long time, the truth had been spoken. And in that silence, I felt something new. Not emptiness, but a beginning. My own. The next morning I woke up early. I had a strange dream, as if I was sitting at that table again. But this time no one said a word. Everyone just disappeared, and I was left alone. And then I woke up and realized, in reality, finally, that's exactly how it was. I was alone, but not lonely. The phone rang first. Tom. I didn't answer. Then it rang again, and again. I put it face down so I couldn't see the name. A couple of hours later, I got a message from Jenna. I'm sorry. I didn't want it to happen like this. I reread it several times but didn't reply. What could I say? It's okay? That would have been a lie. And I had decided not to lie anymore, not even out of politeness. Then came calls from mutual friends. Some wanted to clarify what had happened. Some wrote that they were shocked. Some just sent a heart. We're with you. I wasn't angry. I didn't waste any more energy on anger. I felt as if a heavy stone had been lifted from me. It had been inside me for years, and I didn't even realize how much it was weighing me down. Now I felt empty, light, and quiet. I made some tea and put on some music. I opened the window. There was a cool spring breeze. I sat down at my desk and opened my notebook. For the first time in a long time, I wanted to write something. Not a report or a shopping list, but my thoughts. Words that belonged only to me. I didn't break, I wrote. I got up, late, tired, but I got up, and now I'm moving forward, alone. But honestly. Tom called again around dinner time. Again, I didn't answer. He left a voicemail saying, "Please listen to me. I'm sorry. I need you." I deleted it without listening to the end. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't matter anymore. I understood that he didn't regret what he had done. He regretted that I had found out. And that's not love. That's selfishness. I went outside in the evening, just to walk around. People were passing by with bags, with children, some in a hurry, some laughing. And I felt that I was part of this world again, not someone's shadow, but a person. A woman who is no longer afraid to be true to herself. I woke up early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The sun hadn't reached the window yet, but the morning was surprisingly light. I sat in silence, drank water with lemon, and felt something inside me straighten out. It was as if, after a long winter, I had finally opened my eyes and seen spring. I didn't know where to start. I just felt that I had to start with myself. So the first thing I did was open my closet. Half of the clothes in it belonged to the woman I no longer was. Gray sweaters, stretched-out cardigans, comfortable shoes with no hint of style. I pulled them all out into one big pile and set them aside for charity. Let them serve someone else. And I'll buy myself something new. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Next was the bathroom. I took out the creams I didn't use. I turned on the music. I put a face mask on and laughed at myself in the mirror. It wasn't the well-groomed, smooth woman I once wanted to be, but this was the real me. And I liked her. Then I made breakfast. No rush, no hurry. I made an omelet with greens, brewed some good coffee, and placed the cup on the bright windowsill. And I just ate, with pleasure, without thoughts, without anxiety. After breakfast, I opened my laptop. My old job no longer interested me, but inside I felt that I could do more. Maybe I'll start writing, or start a small business. Handicrafts, cooking, blogging. Everything sounded possible. The main thing was not to put it off. I made a list of ideas and inspirations. Not plans, inspirations. I had been missing that for a long time. In the evening, I made up my mind and made an appointment at a salon. Haircut, coloring, manicure. Just because. Not for a date. Not for a celebration. For myself. When the stylist asked me what I wanted, I replied, I want the reflection to be who I feel like, not who others see me as. When I left, I felt renewed. Not young, real. The person I had returned to. On the way home, I smiled at my reflection in a shop window and thought, now it all begins. Going to the store turned out to be a bold step. It seemed like a normal thing to do. Go grocery shopping. But I felt different now. Inside, it was as if I had grown a few inches. And not because I was wearing new boots. It was because my posture was no longer bent under the weight of other people's expectations. People on the street looked at me, and I didn't know if they recognized me. Some nodded in greeting, others stopped to say, "You look beautiful today." No one knew that it wasn't just makeup and a new haircut. This was a woman who had regained her self-respect. At the grocery store, I ran into an old acquaintance, Alice, with whom I used to take my children to school. She looked at me for a long time, then approached hesitantly. "Is that you?" she asked, frowning. "You look completely different." I smiled. "No, it's me. Just the real me." She didn't know what to say. She said something about how youth suits you, and left, clearly confused. And I felt that yes, it wasn't youth that suited me, but freedom. Then my sister called. She had heard about the dinner, of course. She asked cautiously, Is it all true? You've changed so much." I just decided not to keep quiet anymore, and not to hide myself anymore, I replied. She fell silent, then said, "You know, I envy you. In a good way, you've done it. You've become yourself." When I got home, a new me looked back at me in the hallway mirror. Not the me in my passport or my status. The real me. I was no longer seeking approval. I wasn't waiting for a phone call. I wasn't trying to please anyone. I signed up for a class, just because. Interior design had always been a dream of mine. I started posting recipes on a blog. People wrote to me, thanked me, showed interest, and most importantly, I felt needed again. Not as a wife, not as a friend, but as a person. It wasn't just liberation. It was a return. To myself. To the woman who once dreamed, hoped, believed, and whom I was no longer going to betray. I didn't plan to meet them. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't expecting it. But fate, as we know, loves irony. I went into a cafe near the park, a new place, cozy, with soft armchairs and huge windows. I just wanted to have a coffee, read, be alone with myself. And then I saw them. They were sitting at a corner table. Tom was slumped over, his eyes dull, staring at his phone with a blank look, and Jenna was tense, nervously twirling a spoon in her cup. They weren't laughing. They didn't look happy. They looked tired, as if they had nothing to say to each other, as if there was silence between them, filled only with the echo of their mistakes. I didn't immediately realize that they had noticed me. Tom looked up first. His face froze. His lips parted slightly. He wasn't expecting it. He was expecting to see her, defeated, tired. But standing in front of him was me, composed, light, in a light-colored coat, with a smile that no longer depended on his opinion. Jenna slowly turned around. Her gaze was a mixture of embarrassment and jealousy. She sized me up, the way you size up a rival. Her eyes narrowed, but I felt neither anger nor pain toward her, only a slight pity. I nodded, calmly, without fuss, like greeting acquaintances with whom you no longer have anything in common, and I walked on, back to my table. The waitress brought my order. I enjoyed every sip of coffee, not thinking about how they felt, not wondering if they would approach me. But Tom got up anyway. He came over. "Can I sit down?" he asked uncertainly. "I don't think that's a good idea," I replied, calmly, without insult, just setting boundaries. He nodded silently. There was so much regret in his eyes that it would have broken my heart before. But not now. I let him go. A long time ago. And myself too. When they left, I stayed sitting in that cafe for a long time. With my book, with warmth, with a sense of victory that no one applauded, except my heart. Sometimes life answers you when you stop begging it for change. It all happened on a routine walk through the city. I just popped into a furniture store, attracted by the window display. I wanted to see how the space was decorated, to get some inspiration for my design classes. But standing behind the counter was Linda, a woman in her 50s with confident eyes and a professional smile. "Are you interested in design?" she asked. "I'm studying it," I replied without hesitation. In the past, I would have downplayed it, saying, "Just for myself," but not now. I really am studying it. She looked at me intently, as if something about my face had caught her interest. "We have a small project coming up. We're renovating a space for a local charity. We need to figure out how to make it cozy on a shoestring budget. Would you like to give it a try?" I froze. "No pay, of course," she added. "But if you like it, we might offer you something permanent." It was almost unreal. Not because it was unbelievable, but because I hadn't believed in my chances for so long. But now I was ready. I accepted. Work began the very next day. The room was gray, empty, with peeling walls and a musty smell. But I saw potential in it. I brought sketches. I picked out fabrics. I repainted it myself. I brought in details that had been lying around in my attic. And then, voila. A week later, the space came to life. When the foundation's employees first walked inside, one of them cried. He said that now the children who come there will feel warmth. Linda looked at me with the respect I had been lacking for so long. "You didn't just do it," she said. "You did it with soul. You have talent. Would you like to work for us, on a permanent basis?" I stood there in my dusty jeans with a drop of paint on my hand and felt a warm wave spread through me. "Yes," I replied. "I would love to." It wasn't just a job. It was recognition. Confirmation. I can do it. I am capable. I am real. And it was my first real victory. No shouting, no revenge, just the result of my choice to be myself. Every morning now began with a sense of purpose. I got up early, made coffee with cinnamon, and reread my tasks for the day. My daily planner became full and organized, and my heart was calm. I worked at the design studio with Linda, consulted with clients, helped with projects, and sometimes offered solutions that were later implemented. I was living. But one evening, there was an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. The handwriting was neat. The paper was thick, like old letter paper. I opened it.
If you're reading this, it means I've finally made up my mind. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness or understanding, but I'll try anyway. Every day since that dinner, I've been replaying in my head how things could have been different. I didn't just lose a wife. I lost someone who believed in me when I despised myself. I betrayed myself. And you. I'm sorry. Tom. I stared at the letter for a long time. I felt neither pain nor anger. It was a strange feeling, as if someone had finally closed an old door in my heart. I didn't cry. I didn't respond. I just put the letter back in the envelope and put it in a drawer. Not to keep it, but to let it go.
The next day, Linda and I went to look at a new property. It was an old country house. The client wanted to turn it into a place for women's retreats. I stood on the porch, breathing in the scent of pine needles, listening to the silence and thinking. Just a year ago, I was sitting at home, not knowing who I was, except as someone's wife and a shadow of myself. Now I saw meaning in every detail. I started writing again, in my blog, about inner transformation, about a second youth. Women wrote to me, "You have given me hope. I have also decided to make a change." Sometimes I wanted to go back and say to my former self, "You will be happy. Just hang in there. You deserve it." Now every morning began not with memories, but with plans. With inspiration, I was alive. And finally, I wasn't afraid to look to tomorrow. I thought long and hard about whether I should do it. Then I decided, yes, I should. Not to show what I had achieved, but to thank those who didn't turn away when everything in me fell apart. That evening was important to me. It was like taking stock, saying, "Here I am, me again." I prepared everything myself. a tablecloth with a floral pattern, candles with a light vanilla scent, warm dishes that we all loved, baked pumpkin with cheese, caramelized onion salad, lemon meringue pie. No formalities, just warmth. Those who stayed by my side when everyone else turned away came. Martha, my neighbor, who brought me soup when I couldn't cook. Julie, a colleague who was the first to believe in my talent and encourage me during my job interview. Linda, my mentor and now my friend. Even my niece, whom I had hardly spoken to, came with a bottle of homemade wine and a hug. We laughed, reminisced about old stories, and shared our dreams. At one point, the conversation fell silent, and Julie smiled and said, "You know, you're completely different now. You're glowing. It's like there's a light shining inside you." I smiled, and suddenly I felt like I wanted to say out loud what had been inside me for so long. "I was in the dark," I began, "for a long time. I thought that if you were betrayed, it meant there was something wrong with you, that if love was gone, it meant you were no longer needed. But that wasn't true. I just stopped being convenient. I stopped trying to fit in. I stopped keeping quiet. And you know, it wasn't a fall, it was a beginning. I didn't fall apart. I came back to myself. I am grateful to all of you, because in the moments when I felt like I was all alone, you were there. You were just there, and that saved me." They applauded, quietly, with tears, without loud words. It wasn't a theatrical scene, it was real. When the evening was over and I was clearing the table, my heart was full. I was no longer living in the past. I was living in the present. And with those who were with me not behind a mask, but behind their true selves. The phone rang early in the morning when I had just stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee. There was something spring-like in the air, and the sun's rays gently slid across the white blanket on my knees. I wasn't expecting any calls. Those who are dear to me know that I like to spend my mornings in silence. An unfamiliar number. "Hello?" My voice sounded confident, although inside I was on guard. Is that you?" came the voice on the other end. I recognized it immediately. Tom. I froze for a second. So many years had passed. After his letter, I decided not to respond. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't want to go back to a place where I no longer belonged. "Yes, it's me," I replied calmly. "I'm sorry to bother you. I heard that you're teaching master classes now, that you have your own project. I saw an article, and I just wanted to say that I'm proud of you." It was a strange feeling. As if a person who had once been erased from my life had knocked not on the door, but on the back of time itself. I didn't know what to say, not because I was hurt. Because it no longer had power over me. "Thank you, Tom," I said quietly. "I'm really doing well now, and I hope you found your way too." He was silent. Then he asked, "Are you happy?" I looked at my cup, at the slight tremor of light on its rim. I breathed in the scent of cinnamon, and I said, "Yes, very much so. And I finally understand what it feels like to be myself." "That's good," he whispered. "I'm sorry I didn't understand that before. I was weak, and you are real. Thank you for everything that once was." I hung up the phone feeling not pain, but liberation. It was as if a book you had closed long ago had suddenly fallen into your hands, and you leafed through it, not to reread it, but to make sure once again that you had already lived through that story. That day, I went to the studio with a special feeling. I took new fabrics, new colors, as a symbol. Now it's not just a new chapter. Now my real story begins. Free, mature, and happy. When I registered my name as a brand, my hands were shaking a little. It wasn't fear, more like excitement. It was like sending someone very close to you on a journey, a child, a dream, your former self. I gave the project my name, simply and honestly, because everything I put into it was personal. Every detail, every sketch, every fabric is part of my story. My workshop, once a modest corner of Linda's house, had turned into a spacious room with tall windows, flowers on the windowsills, and the rustle of fabric instead of music. I assembled a small team of women just like me, those who had once been fired, written off, ignored. Smart, calm, real. We weren't just sewing clothes. We were creating silhouettes of confidence, outfits for women who don't want to hide behind their age. We didn't chase trends. We made things that made you want to get up in the morning, smile at yourself in the mirror, and say, "I am me, and I am beautiful." The first orders came from friends, then from their acquaintances. Then we were invited to participate in a craft exhibition. I remember that day. I was standing at my stand, wearing a modest linen dress with an embroidered collar, watching women approach us. They looked, they tried them on, and they glowed. It was magical to see how your work not only pleased people, but helped them feel better about themselves. After the exhibition, an article was published. A woman who started from scratch after 50 inspires hundreds. I smiled when I saw the headline. Not for the recognition. It was because I knew that if even one woman read it and believed in herself, then it would all have been worth it. I started holding small meetings. We would gather in the studio, drink tea, and talk about life. Most of the time, the conversations didn't start with fashion, but with how difficult it is to be heard when you're over 40. It's as if you become invisible. I listened. I supported them. And I repeated, "You don't have to disappear. You have the right to be seen, to be needed, to be beautiful." I didn't just build a business. I built a place where women of any age could feel important. It was my quiet victory, over my fears, over pain, over who they once tried to make me. Now every morning I went to the workshop with joy. I knew why I was living, and most importantly, for whom? For myself. And for those who, like me once, were looking for a second wind. I had been preparing for this evening for a long time, not because I wanted to surprise them, but simply because I wanted to thank them. Those who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Those who lent me a shoulder in my hour of need. Those who weren't put off by my age, my past, or the tiredness in my eyes, and saw me not as a woman over 50, but as a human being. The table was set with simple but beloved dishes, warm mushroom and spinach pie, chicken with lemon sauce and roasted pumpkin salad, wine, candles, soft music. My studio, decorated with fresh flowers, felt like a home that evening, not just a workspace. The guests laughed, chatted, and shared stories. Martha brought her grandchildren. Julie brought photos from our first exhibition. I was standing by the window, enjoying the atmosphere, when the door opened, and I saw him, Tom. He stood there, looking confused, with flowers in his hands, the same eyes, but there was no more arrogance in them, only a shadow of regret. Silence hung in the room. Everyone knew who he was. I approached him calmly, smiled, took the flowers. "Hi, Tom," I said. "Come in. Every guest here is someone who has come with good intentions." He nodded, slowly entered. He hardly spoke all evening. He sat quietly, apart from the others. He looked at me, and only at the end, when the guests were leaving, did he approach me. I wanted to say, "You've become what you always could have been, and I was too weak to see it. I'm sorry. And I'm proud of you." Sincerely, I looked at him, and to my surprise, I felt nothing but warm pity. He was part of my history, but no longer part of my life. "Thank you for coming," I replied, "and thank you for leaving back then. Without that, I would never have found myself." He nodded. He left. Forever, I felt. And I returned to the table. My people were still there. Those who remained, those who love, those who are close. That dinner was not a full stop for me, but an exclamation mark. Life went on. I was free, and I was happy. The next morning I woke up in complete silence. No anxious thoughts, regrets, or worries. Only the sun shining golden rays on my bed and the aroma of coffee, which I had put on to brew out of habit, like a ritual that fills the house with life. I sat down by the window and noticed that the light was on across the street. It was the house next door, where a new tenant had recently moved in. Robert, a widower in his 60s, an artist with kind eyes and a perpetual stubble on his cheeks. We had talked a couple of times on the street, about the weather, about the lavender he wanted to plant, about an exhibition he was going to. He often worked at night, painting by the window with a table lamp, and I had grown accustomed to that light. It was like a beacon, quiet, constant, reliable. And at that moment, I caught myself thinking a strange thought. I was glad he was there. Just that somewhere nearby, behind that window, someone was breathing, living, creating. And that maybe I was the light in his window. The next morning, I took a basket of muffins and knocked on his door. Robert was surprised, but broke into a smile. "This is for making me feel less lonely with the light in your window," I said, handing him the treats. He invited me in for a cup of tea. We talked for a long time, casually. He showed me his paintings, watercolors, soft, a little sad, like memories. I told him about my studio, about my journey. He listened attentively, respectfully, without a hint of condescension. And at that moment, I suddenly realized I was ready, not for love, as in my youth, but for presence, for warmth, respect, kindness, for letting someone back into my days, my morning habits, my life, without fear, without looking back. I didn't know what it would lead to, and there was no rush. I just felt calm. I went home and sat down by the window, and I saw the lights come on in his house again, the same soft, warm, reliable light. And I thought, even if nothing else happens, that's already a lot. Because now finally there is someone in my life again who is just there. The envelope with the invitation to the class reunion arrived unexpectedly. I held it in my hands as if it were a telegram from another era. The inscription was handwritten, 50 years later. "We are waiting for you." Strange. So many years had passed, and even the thought of these people made me feel excited, not afraid. But something trembled inside me. I hesitated for a long time before deciding to go. What would I say? Who would be interested in a woman who had been betrayed by her husband, fired from her job, and started all over again from scratch when others thought her life was over? And then I laughed. This is my story, after all, and as it turns out, it's worth being heard. I put on my favorite dress, the one I sewed myself in the first spring of my new life. It was an exciting dark blue with delicate embroidery at the collar. I put on some light makeup. I did my hair up high, just like I liked when I was young, and I got on the train. The small town greeted me with the scent of lilacs, wet asphalt, and old lime trees. The school hadn't changed much. Only we had changed. People had grown older, but in the eyes of many, they were still the same girls and boys. They didn't recognize me at first. And then they gasped. One of them, Linda, came up to me first. "You look amazing." "What are you doing with your life?" I told her, calmly, without drama, about the affair, about getting fired, about how I opened a workshop, how I sewed my first dress, sold it, and got an order, how I felt like myself for the first time in many years. And surprisingly, no one looked down on me. They listened sincerely, with respect. Some had their own stories, divorces, losses, new beginnings. Others, on the contrary, were only now deciding to live their lives to the fullest. On the way back, I looked out the train window and thought, everything that happened before is now just background. Memories, pain, number, just the fabric of life. Without it, I wouldn't have become who I am. The past stopped hurting. It became something that gives me strength, and that feeling is the most valuable thing I took away from that meeting. The morning began with a letter. I opened it over tea, almost mechanically, while the house was still asleep. It was short. We would like to invite you to be a speaker at the annual conference. Woman, age, power. Your story is inspiring. Your example is important. We need you. I read the letter 3 times. It wasn't just an invitation to speak. It was an invitation to stand up, not in front of an audience, but in front of myself, and to say, yes, I did it. I'm not standing here by accident. When I was young, I was afraid of the stage. I was even afraid of being noticed. I lived quietly so as not to disturb anyone. Then I tried to be convenient, correct, worthy. And now, decades later, I suddenly realized that being myself is not something to be ashamed of. It's beautiful. It's honest. I accepted. The weeks of preparation passed in a blur. I wrote my speech, edited it, threw it away, and started over. I didn't want it to be pretentious. I wanted to be myself, real, without loud slogans. I just wanted to tell people what it's like to survive, pull yourself together, and build a life on the ruins of the old one. And not just survive, to flourish. When I stepped onto the stage, I was scared. Hundreds of eyes, cameras. I was wearing a light-colored dress that I had made myself. And in that moment, as the microphone was being turned on, I thought, if anyone in this room feels lost right now, I'm going to say something that helped me once. My name is Ellen. I am 64 years old, and I only started living my life after I turned 50. It wasn't a speech. It was a conversation about pain, about betrayal, about disappointment, but also about choice, about getting back up, about believing in yourself. You can be beautiful, interesting, desirable, not in spite of your age, but because of it. The room was silent, and then there was a standing ovation. Women with shining eyes came up to me. Some were crying, some just held my hand. And I realized I didn't do this just for myself. I became the voice of those who still whisper when they need to shout. I became a mirror for them, in which they saw themselves for the first time not as broken, but as strong. That was the day I finally said yes to myself. When I returned home, the house was quiet, but not empty. It was a different kind of silence, not the kind that rings with loneliness, but the kind that envelops you like a blanket. The silence of confidence, peace, and choice. I took off my shoes, put my bag by the door, and walked barefoot across the warm floor. I smiled, even though no one was there. I just was. I bought this house myself, renovated it, repainted every wall, and planted a garden. There are flowers on every windowsill, fabric in every room, light and warmth. This is where I work, where I sleep, bake pies, and talk to my neighbors over the fence. It's not just a place to live. It's a reflection of my new life. On the kitchen wall hung a photograph of me on stage, wearing that very dress, with a microphone in my hand. Strong, calm, real. I didn't hang it up to show off. I hung it up to remind myself, you did it. You stood up. And you are. My former colleagues now called me master. I had opened a small sewing school. Women who were tired of being invisible came to study there. We sew not only fabric, but also new lives. We talk. We laugh. We cry sometimes. And it's all part of the journey. Tom never showed up again. Jenna, my former friend, sent me a couple of letters. No apologies, no excuses. Just, hi, how are you? I didn't reply. Not because I was offended. It just wasn't necessary anymore. I had left their circle. I left and became myself. One evening, I went out into the garden. I had a cup of tea in my hands, and the evening sky above my head. Crickets chirped in the grass, and a dog barked somewhere in the distance. I sat down on a bench and closed my eyes. How old I was didn't matter. How many wrinkles I had didn't matter. What mattered was that I felt safe, in love, in harmony. I wasn't seeking revenge. I wasn't destroying anything. I had simply built my own life, my own business, my own strength, my own home, my own light. And on that evening, in that silence, in that garden, I realized that everything that had happened had not been in vain. Everything that had happened was for the best, because now I am me, without fear, without dependence, without the need to be accepted by anyone. I became the woman I once dreamed of meeting. And if suddenly, somewhere else, on the other side of the city, someone is also drinking tea alone, looking out the window, I hope that one day she will also say to herself, I did it. I am home, and I am happy here. I didn't expect to see him. Several months had passed since that evening when I got up from the table, gathered my strength, and told everyone that my husband and my best friend had betrayed me. Since then, I had avoided those who had witnessed it. Not because I was ashamed, no. It was just that I thought they would look at me with pity, and I didn't want to be pitied anymore. I was walking through the market, picking out fresh apples, when someone touched my shoulder. I turned around and recognized him immediately. It was Mark, my ex-husband's cousin. He had been among the guests that evening. He hadn't said anything then, just stood there silently like everyone else. But now he was standing in front of me with a slight smile and 2 cups of coffee in his hands. I didn't know how to approach you, he began, handing me one of the cups. But all this time I wanted to tell you, you did the right thing. And if no one expressed their support for you then, consider that I am doing so now. I felt my throat tighten, not from pain, but from the unexpected tenderness in his voice. We sat down on a bench by the fountain, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to talk about that night calmly, without trembling. I thought long and hard about why they did it, I said. But then I realized it doesn't matter. What matters is that I came out of it cleaner than I went in. He nodded. And you look strong. Completely different, he added, as if you've finally become yourself. We didn't talk long, but it was enough. His words didn't change my life, but they became a turning point. I realized that everything was behind me. I didn't need to hide. I didn't need to be afraid of people's stares. And most importantly, I no longer had to prove anything to anyone. When I got home, there was a bouquet of lavender and mint on the kitchen table. I bought it myself, just because I wanted to. I made some tea, turned on the radio, and in that moment I realized something important. The pain recedes when you allow yourself to be not just a survivor, but also happy. And I decided that tomorrow I would go to the market again. Not because I hope to meet someone, but because now I know how to walk down the street with my head held high, and let the past remain behind me. I no longer carry it on my shoulders. The next morning, I woke up not to the sound of the alarm clock, but to the scent of fresh air coming through the slightly open window. Summer was slowly coming to an end, but the morning was still warm and calm. I stretched, got up, and, as always, made tea first thing. But now there was no loneliness in it. There was habit, there was freedom, there was silence that I no longer feared. I opened my laptop to read my emails. Among the advertising mailings was one unexpected invitation to a college reunion. 40 years had passed since we parted, scattered across states and lives. I almost deleted the email, but my hand stopped. Why not? When I told Linda, my neighbor and new friend, she perked up. Go, just look at yourself. You look 20 years younger. Let them see what they lost. We laughed, and in that laughter was something I had been missing for many years. Lightness, acceptance, confidence. A week later, I was standing at the entrance to my old college building. Everything had changed, but the smell of the walls, the creaking floors, and the voice of the teacher echoing through the hallways remained in my memory. I stood there in my sky-blue dress and felt alive. Not a former wife, not a betrayed friend, not the one. Just me. Old acquaintances approached me. Some recalled jokes, others remembered past follies. Many did not recognize me at first, which was strangely gratifying. I had truly changed. I had become better, wiser, freer. And then I saw him. Mark, the same one from the market, in a different shirt, but with the same kindness in his eyes. We both smiled. The evening flew by in a flash. We drank coffee, talked about books, about youth, about how amazing and absurdly intertwined our lives were. When he walked me to my car, I felt that I didn't want this to be just a memory. I smiled. "Would you like to come over for tea sometime?" He nodded, and in that simplicity was the beginning of something new. No loud promises, no fears, no rush, just the beginning. I never thought I could start from scratch at my age. I believed that radical changes were the privilege of youth. But life had other plans. I lost a lot to one day sit on the terrace in the morning, pick up a cup of tea, and say to myself for the first time in a long time, "You are happy." Mark started coming over more often. He didn't rush me or suggest starting over. He was just there, bringing fresh pastries in the morning, fixing the faucet when it dripped, or just sitting silently next to me while I leafed through old photo albums. I didn't need to explain my pain to him. He already understood everything, and for that, I was especially grateful. We didn't call our meetings dates. We just were. At some point, I realized that it didn't matter what we called it. What mattered was that I felt calm when he was around. I could be myself, with all my scars, with a new smile, and without the need to prove anything. Meanwhile, I started volunteering at a local library, not for money, for the feeling of being needed. I helped children with reading, and once even held a meeting for women over 40, where I told my story, without drama, just as a human being. Some listened with tears in their eyes, some took notes. After the meeting, a woman came up to me and said, "You gave me back my hope." I hugged her silently. The house that had seemed empty to me before was filled with life. I changed the wallpaper, rearranged the furniture, and threw away everything that reminded me of betrayal. Not out of anger, but out of a desire to leave the past behind. Now there are always fresh flowers in the kitchen. On the wall is an old photograph of me smiling. Back then, I was naive. Now I am strong. And the two are not mutually exclusive. Mark and I cook dinner together. Not because we have to, but because we want to. Sometimes he reads to me aloud while I knit. We laugh at silly things and share our plans for the weekend. There are no grand words, but that's the point. I feel alive again. One evening he asked me, "Would you ever want to leave here?" I looked at him, at my house, at the warm light in the windows. "No," I replied, "because this is where I learned to live again. And this is where I built the home I want to stay in."